Testing, check, check. 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello. Welcome. This is a brand new stream that we're going to try out on Tuesdays that helps you get a little bit more into the process of studying the Bible for yourself, studying, getting more into it, digging into the context, because it's really important that we don't cherry pick verses or gloss over scripture to just get what we want to get out of it. It's important that we actually study it in context and study it and understand what they were saying in the time they were saying it to help translate correctly into our modern day. And for those of you that don't know, I'm Pastor Koko from Final Fantasy XIV, and I'm one of the elder pastors here at VRMMO Church. And one of the things that I do is I create these visual study notes. They help me when I'm teaching. I do guest teach at VR Church in Altspace once a month. This is how I study. I'm a visual person. This is how I make connections. And it has helped me to really see some things that I've never seen before. And I'm in my 40s now, and I've been reading the Bible my whole life, and doing it this way has really helped me to see things I never saw before. And it's really opened my eyes to some pretty awesome things that I would have never seen if I had just continued to read it the way I've been reading it and the way many people read it, which is you'll pick a verse or you'll pick a little chapter to just have a little devotional and apply a little bit of concept to your life, and then you go on about your life. But there's so much more. It's so much more rich than that, and I'm going to start trying to teach you guys how to do that as well. As I study and work on my study notes for each of the sermons that I'm going to be working on, I'll be working live on that and teaching you as I go. So what you're seeing here is this is Miro. This is an online collaboration tool, and that uses Post-it notes. It's an online whiteboard that lets teams collaborate, but I use it for research. Like I said, if I had room in this room, you would see nothing but Post-its all over the walls, because that's how I think. And so this layout here, let me give you some context as to what's going on here. For each of the sermons that I work on, we go chapter by chapter here at VRMMO Church. And so I'm set to study chapter 13. Matthew chapter 13 is the next one that I'm going to be helping with. And so I have chapter 13 laid out visually here by verse or by a set of verses, depending on what's going on within those verses. And then each verse or set of verses, like 1 through 2, I will have notes specifically to that verse to the side. and they're broken up, and I'll show you how I do this. It's not hard at all, I promise. And so I have a reminder here for myself that I try to always remember whenever I'm studying anything, to study everything in the light of the greatest command. And Jesus told us what that greatest command was in Matthew 22:37. Jesus declared, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your intelligence." And he goes on to say, "And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commands." And so their reference back in the day, they referred to the Old Testament as the law and the prophets. So this is saying that all of those commands, everything that is written in the Bible, as far as commands, as far as anything to do, telling us how we should live, is based on, or all those rules that we assume are just rules that are there to oppress us, are actually, that's not how it was ever intended. It was all intended to be based on love. And that's what they forgot, the Pharisees forgot back then, and that's what we often forget today. And so I try to remind myself that all of this thing, everything that we're studying in the Bible, should be referenced in that light of that greatest command of love. And the sources that I just have a list of sources for reference. Of these are the ones that I have used so far with this study, as the Bible, of course, Constable's Notes, that's a commentary, Strong's Concordance, and the Greek lexicon are used to look up words, and then the Bible Project I've used for this one. And all of these notes that you see here are from the Bible Project, and I have links to those study notes so that I can quickly get to them again. The parables of Jesus, because chapter 13 talks about his parables. So this is what the Bible Project put together, teaching about parables in general and his approach to that whole way of communicating. And then there's a video that they put out that is an easier read, or it's not a read at all. It's a visual video of them talking through that and teaching about the parables, that whole theme. So those are my references, my reference sources that you see. And then I do color code my Post-its. So the study notes, all of these here are study notes that I have taken notes from these references. And stats are in blue. I don't have any stats this time. I have in the past. I don't in this one, at least so far. And purple are my personal thoughts. So anytime you see a purple Post-it, that's me making my own little question or thought about what's going on here, making my own mental connections. And the overall themes, yeah, these are my thoughts. And then references are, again, this gold color. These are all the sources and references, and I will mention those here in the notes. This is what it's referencing. And then misconceptions are in pink. So you'll see those littered throughout the notes. There's a common misconception about this scripture, and so here we will try to clear it up. And quotes are in white. So whenever there's a quote from a scripture or a quote from something somebody said, that's going to be in white. And then prayer is in green. And so that's just my color code. And I have this here to remind myself that's my color code, so I can quickly see what is going on with the notes. And a little background about me, I guess. I am a professional designer and researcher, so this method of using Post-its and color coding them and so forth just comes naturally to me. It's not going to come naturally to everyone, but you can still learn it. It is easy to pick up if you want to do this type of visual study. And so the overall theme, so I'm talking about Matthew 13 in a few weeks. These notes are intended to, they were, first of all, I started doing them to try to help me understand what was going on, because it's complicated and I wanted to understand, but just reading about it and taking notes like that wasn't helping me to see things again, I think visually. So I just started plotting it out on Post-its, and here's the end result. I do iterate on it each time I do one. But for context, we're going to be looking at Matthew 13 today, because that's the next thing I'm going to be working on. And the services, we are currently on our next one's going to be chapter 12. So we're not talking about chapter 12 today. We're talking about 13. But for a quick recap this is a recap of what I'm seeing as a theme as I go through and do it this way versus just reading. I wouldn't have seen this if all I had done was read. So the themes that I'm seeing here are that in chapter 1, so this whole book of Matthew is written by Matthew, one of the original 12 apostles. And he was tasked with writing to the Jews to convince them, or to make the case that Jesus is the Messiah. He was their prophesied Messiah. And so he writes this entire book with that in mind, who is his target audience, the Jews. And chapter 1, he's talking about the fulfillment of the prophecy through Jesus. He lists out the lineage of Jesus because that's one of the prophecies. And he talks about this coming of the Messiah through Jesus. And then in chapter 2, the enemy hears about this Messiah and is trying to prevent his coming. So he uses local leaders who are threatened by this to go and try to stop the Messiah from growing up. And so Mary and Joseph have to flee with Jesus to another country for a little while until things get smoothed over before they can come back. And some very sad things happen in there. And that's what happens when the enemy is threatened and he tries to prevent Messiah from coming. And in chapter 3 is around his preparation for being presented to Israel as the Messiah, and the announcement of his arrival by John the Baptist, and God actually vocally proclaiming to the crowd, "This is my son, he's here, he's the Messiah." And then in chapter 4, he's tested in the wilderness for his preparation into ministry, because ministry is not easy. It is a very difficult thing, and he had to be ready for that. So he went to be tested in the wilderness to prepare for that and to get alone to be with God. And also in this chapter, he begins to start teaching and healing those, and he begins to choose his core team of people that he's going to set up as the apostles, the original founding apostles of the Christian church, the Christian faith. And the healing and the teaching were direct fulfillments of prophecy again. And so everything that he's doing is in light of direct fulfillment. Matthew, everything that he's writing about is in light of these direct fulfillments of prophecy. In chapters 5 through 7, he's teaching his Sermon on the Mount, and that is Jesus teaching the principles of the kingdom of heaven. These are the principles. This is how the people, the inhabitants of the kingdom of heaven, should be. This is how they should behave. This is how I want my people to be. And it was all about the heart. And in chapter 8 through 9, Jesus began demonstrating his authority as the Messiah. He demonstrated his authority over sin, and over death, and over nature, and over humans. And you can see that throughout 8 and 9, demonstrated public demonstrations of authority. Again, public demonstrations of fulfillment of prophecy about the Messiah, having authority over all of these things. And then chapter 10 is him empowering the 12, his 12 that he chose, and instructing his disciples on their mission and giving them clear and direct instruction. And then chapters 11 through 13 are a record of Israel's rejection of all of this proof that he is the Messiah. This is a record of their rejection of that. In chapter 11, it talks about how John the Baptist had doubts. His disciples had doubts. The crowds rejected him because he wasn't what they were expecting. He didn't fit into their mold that they had been believing their entire lives and for generations of what the Messiah was supposed to be like. He didn't fit that mold, and they didn't like that, so they rejected him. And the religious leaders start to openly oppose him in chapter 12, and you'll see this on Sunday. And his own family doesn't fully understand his mission and his purpose here either. And in 13, which is what I'm working on, is as a result of all of this rejection of him as Messiah, he changes his strategy for how he talks to the crowds and how he deals with the Pharisees and everything. He's changing his tactics as a result of their rejection. And so the overall themes that I'm seeing so far I only have one, is that if you can't get the basic truth of Jesus as the Messiah, then you won't be able to understand any greater truth that God reveals. You won't be able to understand it because you can't get that one. And that basic thing, Jesus is Messiah, is the foundation of anything else that you need to understand. So if you can't understand that simple truth, you will completely be unable to understand anything greater than that. And so Jesus changed his tactics, his teaching method, as a result of their rejection by beginning to speak in parables. And his parables take into account the larger biblical storyline of creation and the image of God, and the rebellion and the exile from the garden, and the scattering of the Jews into Babylon, or the scattering of Babylon at the beginning, and then the new creation and the covenant with Abraham, the rebellion and exile again in Babylon. And then this hope of this future restoration of Israel and this new creation. And that's the books of the prophets that's talking about. It's taking all of this into account, including those prophecies. And he is constantly quoting the prophecies, and he is constantly fulfilling those prophecies in front of everyone. And this is something that I got from the Bible Project. A note, this was from Constable's notes, was this entire chapter 13 is set up in this chiastic structure. It's a crossing that is commonly used in the Old Testament. Matthew's using it here in the New Testament because, again, his audience is the readers of the Old Testament, the law and the prophets. So it starts out with an introduction and ends with the conclusion, and then the first parables to the crowds, the last parables to his followers. Then he gives some explanatory interludes because the people don't understand what the parables mean. And the first explanation is the purpose, and the last explanation is the response. And then 3 more parables are to the crowds, 3 parables are to his followers, and there's another explanation. So the first few parables that are given in the first half of the chapter are to the crowds, and then the last ones are directly to his followers. And there are 2 audiences here, the crowds and his followers. One is a hostile audience. They are convinced that he's dangerous and that he's a lunatic. And then the other audience is the one that is open-minded, and they see the parables as something that intrigues and stimulates dialogue. Those are his followers. And these are just visual connections that I've made to help me say, yeah, these are the people that are convinced he's a lunatic. That's the general crowds. General crowds have rejected him. They're just there to see the miracles and see the show. And then the people that are actually following him are the ones that are open-minded, and they're the ones that are intrigued and are asking questions and digging deeper. So now there is this misconception that the parables in the Bible are just moralistic tales, that Jesus was just telling moralistic stories, and that wasn't what he was doing. He didn't use them that way. He was revealing new truths about the kingdom of heaven that had never been previously revealed. They were truths that had never been revealed before. Before he had been speaking very, very plainly. But due to their unbelief, he's starting to speak now in these riddles or mysteries about the kingdom, so that only his followers would understand, because only his followers are going to make an effort to understand. And then he interpreted the meaning to his followers so that they would understand. But he didn't interpret to the crowds. Their disbelief that he was the Messiah was clouding their ability to understand. So he knew that, and he didn't bother explaining, because they wouldn't get it. He's just not going to get it because you've already rejected me. And there's this other misconception that the parables that Jesus spoke were the only ones in the Bible. They're not. That was a very common rabbinical practice to get people to think and to dive in and to study more. And the ancient prophets used this regularly as well to accuse and to warn the people, the Israels, of God's coming judgment, but to also point to future restoration and hope, the bringing of shalom, which is what Jesus was doing, bringing shalom. So the first parable is the parable of the sower, and this parable introduces all the ones that follow. So now let's talk about how I did this. So I use Constable's Notes and Net Bible and Bible Project. So I used the Bible Project, and I just looked through this to see. This is where I got the information about the moralistic tales, and just read through it to see, is there anything that's specifically relevant to chapter 13, because this is mentioning many things. So chapter 13 is mentioned here. So I grabbed notes regarding any of those patterns, like this, in light of the story of the Hebrew Bible. I've got those notes in there: creation and the image of God, the rebellion and exile. That's here. That's what I created here. These notes here. That's that chart that we see here. I could have also just grabbed a screenshot of it, actually. That would have also been easy. And so just reading through this to see, is there anything relevant specifically to 13? Is there any kind of overall theme here? Crucial points for interpreting Matthew 13. So it's strategically placed as a reflection of the diverse responses from Matthew 11 through 12, from the people to Jesus' announcement of the kingdom found in Matthew 4 through 10. John the Baptist doubts Jesus. The crowds reject Jesus. The Galilean towns reject Jesus. The Pharisees and the religious leaders accuse him of being of Satan. And his own family doesn't understand what his true mission is here. They don't even understand that he's truly the Messiah, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, because of the whole way he came. He was of virgin birth, and angels came to them and said, this is who he is. But it's kind of baffling that they don't fully understand what that means yet. But we have 20/20 hindsight, so it's a little easier for us to understand things when we're looking back on them than it is when we're looking at them in the here and now. And it's talking about the parables to the hostile audience and to the open-minded audience. So that's what I put here, these post-its. There are two audiences and their responses. And it's just a summary that I put here based on this. It stimulates dialogue and further understanding for those that are open-minded. And so now I also use NetBible as a source. I love NetBible. I highly recommend it. netbible.org. And we're on Matthew 13. And so the NetBible has interpreter's notes. So you can see all of these. If you're using the Net2 translation, you see all of these little notes next to the words that go directly to the translator's notes. And I also use Constable's notes, which is this second tab here, which is a commentary from Thomas Constable on the entire Bible. He has a commentary on the entire Bible, and that's one of the commentaries that they use. They have other ones, but my favorite is Constable's notes because his approach and how he lays it out is very easy to dig further into, whereas the other commentaries are they're more kind of paragraph. I can't really explain it, but I like how he breaks it out verse by verse, which is not as they don't do it in the other commentaries as much as how he does it. So that's why I particularly like Constable's notes, is because how he breaks down the information. And I also use Bible Hub. Speaking of Bible Project, I can go ahead and pull that up too. They are excellent. And when you can find all kinds of resources if you go to their little hamburger menu on the right and then go to downloads and then view all here. You can see an entire list of all of their resources that they have created, and whether or not they have study notes or a video or a poster or script references. I like to use their study notes. That's what this one is the study notes that they used to create their videos. So you can see everything that they have created so far. And here they keep it up to date, and everything is free, which is awesome. The same, the NetBible does have a paid version, but the free version is plenty to do what I'm doing here. And Bible Hub is where I get the lexicon, the Greek lexicon. So if I look at Matthew 13, it is broken down by verse, and it has all of the different translations here. And I can see all the different translations that I want to see here in one place. And to the side here, you can see it in context of the verse before or after, and you can click on individual verses to see, and you can click through the verses here to see if you want to look up a certain word. You can just click on that word and see the Strong's Concordance and the Greek lexicon about that word. What was the context that it's normally used in? What was it used? How was it used originally back in those days? And it also has cross references to the side where you can find it used in other places to see the context of it being used in other places, which is really important when you're wanting to study and understand concepts. So that is what I've been doing so far. You'll see that I've made a little bit of progress, but there's still a ton left to do here. Still got a lot left to do. But I go through and just read and take notes as I go is basically what I'm doing. All of this work was done up front to set the premise to the crowds. You don't have to go as in depth as I'm going. And it doesn't even have to be laid out the way that I'm laying it out. It's really, if you're wanting to understand the Bible more and you think visually like I do, you can do it however is going to make sense to you. I do it in this way because I have an audience of other pastors, because other pastors use these notes as well. So that's why you see it laid out the way it is. But really, if you're just doing it for yourself, do what makes sense to you. Hi, white fluffy bear. White fluffy bear. And thanks for the notes. Thanks for the follow as well. Sorry, my eyes aren't that great. I can't see very well who just followed. Man of the Moon, thanks for the follow. So how did I break these down? Is the next thing. I broke these down based on, as you see, I have them in chunks, in sections. I broke them down how it is in Net Bible, in their Net 2 translation. Parable of the sower is, here they've got it broken down through 23. But I broke it down more because this is really, the parable is really through verse 9. And then I broke it down further, the need for the parables, because he's going in, starting at verse 10, why do you speak to them in parables? And then I just made my own category. This is where he starts talking about the need for them. And then his explanation of it starts in verse 18, so I just broke that out. So here's what they mean. So listen to the parable. And he starts explaining what it means here. And then the next parable of the weeds starts at verse 24. So I just broke it up according to that again. And I just went down through the whole chapter, parable of the mustard seed, the yeast, the purpose of the parables, and just broke it up the way they have it broken up in the Net 2 translation, so that we can quickly scan for a section if we need to, and quickly find the verse that we need if we need a verse. And again, all of the lines that I'm creating are connecting thoughts. And so so how I approach this part, and do ask questions if you have them. How I broke down this part is that, so I just start reading. So verse 1 through 2. On that day, after Jesus went out of the house, he sat by the lake, and such a large crowd gathered around him that he got into a boat to sit while the whole crowd stood on the shore. And here, there was a long discourse at the beginning of this. This is where I got that graph that I showed you earlier about the chiastic structure of this whole chapter. I just translated that into these post-its over here and made my own little connections visually to other things that I had noted. And so once I read through that, and I created the notes based on those premises, which are up here at the top, which was talking about the whole concept of the parables and the misconceptions around them and why they were speaking in parables, is what he's talking about here at the beginning. And then he gets into the, let's see, where is it? He's setting up the setting. Matthew linked this teaching with the controversy in chapter 12 by using the phrase on that day or on that same day. These parables were a response to Israel's rejection to her king. And so I'm just going through here. So Jesus sat down by the Sea of Galilee to teach the people in rabbinic fashion. And that was the same rabbinic fashion he sat to teach the multitudes in chapter 5 for the Sermon on the Mount, because that was a traditional way that the rabbis sat to teach their students. It was a common symbol of authority. And so I just take the quick note. And that's another reason that I like using the Post-its, besides you being able to lay them out visually, is that you have to keep it short and concise, which is easy for scanning later to get the key points of something. So you're mainly just summarizing something. You don't have to use complete sentences. You're just getting the thought down the way that it makes sense to you so that you can look at it later and see connections and so forth. And so I just read through it. He sat down in rabbinic fashion. In response to the crowd that had assembled, he went out on a boat where more people could hear him more easily. That's because of acoustics on water. He proceeded to address the crowds, most of whom had rejected him. And then he proceeded to tell the parables. So acoustics, and this is something I know just from science, this sitting in the boat on the water lets them hear more clearly. That's why he did it. And most of them were the people who rejected him. In Matthew, and it has a cross-reference here to chapter 11. If you hover over these chapters in the Net Bible Constable's Notes, it will bring up that reference here, which is really nice. You can just see the cross-reference without having to go to it. So that cross-reference is here, and I went ahead and copied and pasted that so I could see it. To what should I compare this generation? They are like children sitting in the marketplaces who call out to one another. We played the flute for you, yet you didn't dance. We wailed in mourning, yet you didn't weep. So this is kind of explaining why he is beginning to speak in parables. It's because they rejected him. They're not listening to him speaking plainly. So now, okay, I'm gonna just start speaking to the people who actually want to listen now, instead of the ones that just want the show. Because a lot of them were now there just for the show. And this is all just re-emphasizing the whole concept of the parables revealing the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. And in 3 through 9 is the parable of the soils. The focus is on the seeds, not the sowers. So let's read this. He told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, the seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they didn't have much soil. They sprang up quickly because the soil wasn't deep. But when the sun came out, they were scorched, and because they didn't have sufficient root, they withered." White fluffy bears, I'm just amazed at the notes on the along to the right. Thanks. Other seeds fell among the thorns, and they grew up and choked them. But other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100 times as much, some 60, and some 30. The one who has ears had better listen. So if you pay attention, you'll notice that the focus is on the seeds, not the sower. And then it breaks down in 3 through 7 that where the seeds fell. And so the first seeds, let's see where that note is. Modern interpretation of the parable has increasingly recognized this implication of the literary form of this particular parable over against the dogmatic assertion in earlier New Testament scholarship following Adolf Uliger that a parable has only a single point and that all the rest is mere narrative scenery, which must not be allegorized to determine what each detail means. So this is just them arguing what the point is of the parable, and is there more than one point? The parable is on the types of soils. Okay, so it's on the types of soils, not the seeds. So I need to fix that. It's on the soils, not the sower. And the first seeds fell on the path, and Some seeds fell beside the path that was hard from traffic. They lay on the surface where birds saw them and devoured them before they could germinate. And so I just typed in those notes. Fell on the path that is hardened and packed down by lots of traffic. And my own personal thought was this is kind of like trails that commonly walked on, that you see when there are sidewalks, but people take shortcuts, and you'll see that shortcut quickly becomes packed down, so grass can't grow there anymore. And so that's kind of what I like that. The ground is too hard and too packed down for the seeds to grow there. So if any fall there, they're not going to take root. They're not going to be able to grow. And so then the birds pick them up and carry them off before the seed can even grow. And then the rocky soil. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they didn't have much soil. They sprang up quickly because the soil was not deep. But when the sun came up, they were scorched, and because they didn't have sufficient root, they withered. And so when we see over here, other seeds fell where the topsoil was thin. So sometimes you'll have some soil that is, you've got some soft topsoil, but it doesn't go down very deep. Then there's going to be some limestone or some other kind of rocky ground underneath it that keeps the water from getting to the seed, or the seed from getting to the water. It can't go deep enough to get the water that it needs. So then when the hot weather sets in, that seed germinates quickly because if you've ever watched a seed grow in school, you'll see that the roots grow shallow because there's no, if you ever do the school project where you put the paper towel in the little Ziploc bag and watch the seed grow, you'll see how the roots grow and everything and see how it does. But if the soil isn't deep enough to let the roots take deeper into the soil to get the good water underneath the ground, then when the sun comes out and the sun's too hot, that topsoil is going to dry up. And then the plant isn't going to have any water. It's going to get scorched and it's going to die. So that's what it's explaining here in these net notes and from my memory from science class. But the rocky soil, they can't penetrate that stone to get to the good water that stays when the sun gets hot. And so the seeds and the roots can't go very deep, so that it shows above ground more quickly. That's what it means by growing very quickly, because it's not very deep to begin with. And then the larger plant needs a deeper root and the more subsoil water to survive, but it's not getting that here. Consequently, it dies when the sun dries up the surface water. And then other seeds fell among the thorns, and they grew up and choked them. And so here, in the constable's notes, a third group of seeds fell among the thorns that grew along the edges of the field. These thorn bushes robbed the young plants of light and nourishment, so they died too. And there's a reference here. The figure marks a new beginning. To labor in God's vineyard is one thing. To go forth sowing the seed of the word in a field, which is the world, is quite another. So in my notes, I talked about the thorns. Thorns grow very thickly along the edges of the field, and this is something that I see. I grew up in small town Texas, and if you go out to fields, you'll see along the edges of the fields, there's often thick thorns. And I was constantly, when I was a kid, getting caught in those thorns. But the seeds, if they're thrown among the thorns, they can't get enough light or water because they're so thick. The thorn bush is going to smother them out because they can't get the light and the water they need. And so that's the thorn analogy. And then I made and you'll see that I made really quick notes here. The mark of a new beginning, that's what he was saying here. The figure marks a new beginning. And that is the reference to Isaiah 1 through 7 here, where it says Isaiah 1 through 7. And Isaiah 1-7 says, I will sing to my love a song to my lover about his vineyard. My love had a vineyard on a fertile hill. He built a hedge around it, removed its stones, and planted a vine. He built a tower in the middle of it and constructed a winepress. He waited for it to produce edible grapes, but it produced sour ones instead. So now, residents of Jerusalem, people of Judah, you decide between me and my vineyard. What more can I do for my vineyard beyond what I have already done? When I waited for it to produce edible grapes, why did it produce sour ones instead? Now I will inform you what I'm about to do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge and turn it into pasture. Ugh, that's one of the frustrating things about the hover, is that it will go away if I'm not careful. I will break its wall and allow animals to graze there. I will make it a wasteland. No one will prune its vines or hoe its ground, and thorns and briars will grow there. I will order the clouds not to drop any rain on it. Indeed, Israel is the vineyard of the Lord of heaven's armies. The people of Judah are the cultivated place in which he took delight. He waited for justice, but look what he got. Disobedience. He waited for fairness, but look what he got. Cries for help. Excuse me. And so sorry, I am talking loud because this music sounds very loud to me. I'm trying to make sure everyone can hear me, so that's making my throat hurt. So I just took some key phrases from that reference because that whole reference was a bit long. But so I just grabbed the key notes from it. Isaiah 5:3, so now residents of Jerusalem, people of Judah, you decide between me and my vineyard. What more can I do for my vineyard beyond what I've already done? When I waited for it to produce edible grapes, why did it produce sour ones instead? He waited for justice, but look what he got. Disobedience. He waited for fairness, but look what he got. Cries for help. So Israel is referred to as God's vineyard in multiple places in the Old Testament. And the world is often referred to a field or the wilderness. And so that is the reference that's going on there. And I think it explains it later, but I don't know, but I can quickly explain this if you're interested. So he's talking about here that you've got a choice here. I am the Messiah, and you have a choice whether or not to accept or reject me. And what more can I do beyond what I've already done? I've already proven it to you. I've done all of these things. I've done public demonstrations of fulfillment of prophecy. God has said vocally, I'm him. Angels declared it when I was born. I don't know what else to do here. You've seen the miracles. You've seen the fulfillment of prophecy. You've seen and heard the testimonies from God himself and from angels, but you still reject me. What more can I do here? He got sour grapes instead of edible ones. And he waited for justice, but he got disobedience. He waited for fairness, but he got cries for help. And so Israel is not fulfilling. They're not accepting him as Messiah. And so now what is he going to do? When it was talking about he's going to break down the walls, Israel is no longer going to hold the religion. I'm saying this off the top of my head, but it's no longer going to be the only people, the true inheritors of the kingdom, the only people inheriting the kingdom. He's going to open it up to the whole world. So you're no longer just, it's no longer just you being the chosen. I'm opening this up to everyone. I'm breaking down these hedges and I'm opening it up for everyone. So, and I'm probably not describing that very well. That was him opening it up to the Gentiles, is essentially what that was. So now in verse 8, But other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100 times as much, some 60, and some 30. The one who has ears had better listen. So in 8 through 9 here in his notes, some seed fell on good soil, on good ground, and produced a crop. Even 100-fold return wasn't outstanding. The same sower and seed produced no crop, some crop, or much crop, depending on the soil. And this fourth soil cautions us not to expect the identical levels of fruitfulness in all people, since believers grow spiritually at different rates. And his final statement, the one who has ears had better listen, means that the parable needs careful consideration and interpretation. Jesus later interprets it to his disciples in verses 18 through 23. So I just took those notes then. I just summarized that. The same sower and the same seed on different soils. The outcome depends on the soil. You can either get no crop, some crop, or much crop. And you can't expect identical levels of response in all people because different people grow spiritually at different rates. And then my other thought is that it also depends on the state of the heart of the people hearing the word, hearing the message. And in verse 9, Jesus is saying we need to carefully consider this, careful consideration and interpretation. And Jesus explains it later in 18 through 23, and then I just drew a line to where it starts interpreting it here. So the need for the parables, this is where then the disciples came to him and said, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" He replied, "You have been given the opportunity to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but they have not. For whoever has will be given more and will have an abundance, but whoever doesn't have, even what he has will be taken from him. For this reason I speak to them in parables. Although they see, they do not see, and although they hear, they do not hear, nor do they understand." And then he starts talking about the prophecy and how it's being fulfilled right now. So the followers asked Jesus why he was speaking in parables, and Matthew kind of rearranged this part to help the readers understand, and that's what it's saying here. The disciples wanted to know why Jesus was teaching the parables. This was not the clearest form of communication. Evidently, the disciples asked the question when Jesus had finished giving the parables to the crowd. But he apparently rearranged it. The disciples didn't ask him while he was speaking to the crowds. He asked them after he was done speaking. They wouldn't have interrupted him, I don't think. So that's where they're getting the apparent rearrangement of the material just to help his readers understand. Matthew is trying to help his readers understand the reasons for his use of the parables at this point, since their idiomatic character raises questions in our minds, and we might be too distracted by that to continue on if he doesn't go ahead and explain it. And so in 10, Matthew rearranged it to help the readers understand, because we have other accounts of this, and that's another reason we can know that he was talking to them later, is the other accounts from the other Gospels. When he was alone, those around him with the 12 asked him about the parables. So Matthew arranged it differently than the other writers because he had a different purpose, and he was trying to get his readers to understand what he was trying to say here. And so it was rearranged. So when you're reading the Bible, that's an important thing to think about, is it's not necessarily chronological. It's not necessarily the way we would write today. It's not written for us today. Our literature is very different than the literature of ancient Israel, of the New Testament time. So we shouldn't put the same expectations on that literature that we do on our modern literature, on our modern history writing. It's different. So we need to understand the difference so that we can better understand what's being said here truly versus our false interpretations of that. And And so in verses 11 through 12, you'll see I've got these verses broken up in my notes by how Constable broke it up. And that's simply all I'm doing. So it's not any kind of science to this. I didn't do a bunch of study beforehand to decide how I was going to break it up. I just broke it up how Constable has it broken up for a quick reference. And I can quickly reference back and forth between Constable's notes and the visuals notes to quickly dig any further if I need to back on something if I forgot. So that's the reason I do it that way. It's for easy, quick cross-reference. So Jesus explained that he was teaching in parables because he wanted to give new revelation concerning the kingdom to his disciples, but not to the multitudes. Therefore, he presented this truth in a veiled way. The word mysteries comes from the Old Testament and the Hebrew word raz. It refers to what God knows will happen in the future. Mysteries are secrets, namely divine plans for the future that he reveals to his elect. Paul defined a mystery in Colossians 1:26, where he wrote, "The mystery which has been hidden from the past ages and generations, but has now been manifested to his saints." And a mystery in Scripture is previously hidden truth, now divinely revealed. This chapter shows clearly for the first time that there will be an interval between Christ's first and second advents. So in here in 11 through 12 said he wanted to give new revelation about the kingdom, and he was revealing God's plans for the future kingdom. So again, I'm just, instead of taking very copious notes about what's being said here, because that's what this is, copious notes, I'm just taking key elements out of it. He was teaching in parables because he wanted to give a new revelation concerning the kingdom. He wanted to give a new revelation about the kingdom. And he's talking about what God knows will happen in the future. And he's revealing God's plans for the future kingdom. He didn't want the crowds who rejected the Messiah to know these secrets, so he veiled these secrets through parables. And he says that clearly here, that's what he's doing. He's explaining that's what he's doing in the scripture. So Jesus was revealing some of God's plans concerning the future of the Messianic kingdom, but he was not allowing the unbelieving multitudes to understand. Some have interpreted these parables as revealing the coming kingdom into history in advance of its apocalyptic manifestation. And so now he's talking about various interpretations, various arguments for what different people believe about what this means in these parables. Some believe this. Some believe it's information about the kingdom in view of its postponement. Some believe that it's the normative dispensationalists believe that the very outskirts of the subject already force the conclusion that those mysteries refer not to the nature of the kingdom, but to the manner of its establishment, the means employed, the preparation for it, and the time for its manifestation, and such related topics. So to handle that, I just created a separate note here on the side that there are multiple viewpoints of the meaning of the parables. And then I broke them down based on what the note said here. That some people believe that the coming of the kingdom into history in advance of its apocalyptic manifestation. These people believe this, and so I just broke it down. And then here are some other beliefs. Parables only deal with the period between the first and second advents of the Messiah, and these some believe that it describes the inner advent period. Constable holds this view because he says that later in his notes. After he's given all of these different viewpoints, he says what his viewpoint is and why. And so I just created a separate note to the side what all of the various beliefs are on this, so that people can make their own decisions on that. That is not as important as this key point that Jesus is Messiah. And if you don't understand that, you won't be able to understand anything else. So it's not necessary to get into arguments or debates about it because we can't control it. That's God's thing. So all we can do is understand the different viewpoints and decide for ourselves what we think, but that is not the most important thing here is that Jesus is the Messiah, and that we need to choose whether or not we accept or reject him as Messiah. And where it talks here about the root word, somewhere here, the word mystery is here, the root word Raz. I just take a note of that and put that here. And then I look at the cross reference here that it's saying in Daniel, talking about it. I read the different cross references and I choose which one I want to put here based on context, which one makes the most sense for a quick study, because we don't have time to do even more in-depth study than this. Is Daniel 2:18. He asked them to pray for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends would not be destroyed along with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. In Daniel 2:29, as for you, O king, while you were in your bed, thoughts turned to future things. The revealer of mysteries has made known to you what will take place. And this word, root word, is secrets. What God knows will happen in the future. Previously hidden truth, now divinely revealed. And there's a cross reference to Colossians 1:26 here. That is the mystery that has been kept hidden from the ages and generations, but has now been revealed to his saints. So he's revealing mysteries about the kingdom that no one has understood before. And there are many reasons that he had for switching to the parables. The Jews wanted the Messianic kingdom to start immediately. They had certain expectations for the Messiah and the kingdom that Jesus didn't fit in their minds. And I mentioned that earlier. He wasn't fitting their mold or their expectations of what they wanted the Messiah to be. So they rejected him because he wasn't what they wanted. And they had a hard time believing he was the Messiah. So if they couldn't get that basic truth that he is the Messiah, they would have a really hard time understanding the kingdom. And they would have a really hard time understanding that the kingdom wouldn't come immediately with the Messiah's arrival, because the Messiah's already here, but the kingdom's not here yet. So they wouldn't get that because they didn't get that he's Messiah. So the parable's revealing that there's a time interval here between the Messiah's first and second comings, because the argument is that the kingdom will come with his second coming. There's an argument for that. And that's what we were talking about over here with the different viewpoints, is what is he saying here is there is this time period culminating in the kingdom coming with his second advent. That is a very large number of people that believe that that's what the interpretation is. And parables are an appropriate method to reveal mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. They both need an explanation, and they both take an effort, and they both need open-mindedness of the listener to understand these things. So they're a very appropriate method to use. And when he said in here, whoever has been given more let's see, where is it here? Whoever has will be given more and will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. So whoever has will get more understanding, because these are the open-minded people who are willing to dig in and look into what's being said. Again, it requires open-mindedness. So those who have open-mindedness and have a little understanding will get greater understanding. Because they know he's Messiah, they accept him as Messiah, so they understand this basic truth, they will then receive even greater understanding. But those who don't have, it means they haven't accepted him as Messiah, they've rejected him, and they can't understand that basic truth that he is Messiah, they're not going to receive any further understanding. So they won't be able to inherit the kingdom because they don't understand and they reject him. So the rejected Messiah, so they won't be able to take part in his kingdom. It's an individual choice with lasting consequences. This is a choice. Do you accept him or do you reject him? And so in 14, it's talking about this prophecy from Isaiah. You will listen carefully, yet will never understand. You will look closely, yet will never comprehend. For the heart of this people has become dull. They are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, so that they would not see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts. And in turn, I would heal them. That's not happening because they're rejecting him and they can't understand. So he can't heal them because they're not accepting him. He's not going to force us. So in 14, so it also had to do with their human perception. They were unable to understand the bigger revelation since they failed to understand the basic and clear revelation. And that's what it's talking about. He said they were not able to understand what he had to reveal since they had refused to accept that more basic revelation, namely that Jesus is the Messiah and the kingdom is near. Because he kept saying the kingdom is near. And the parables don't just convey information, they challenge for a response. And the challenge again is, do you accept me as Messiah or not? The unbelievers hadn't responded to the challenge Jesus had already given them. Do you accept or reject me as Messiah? And until they did, they were in no condition to receive more truth. And in this quote here from Isaiah 9 through 10, God told his prophet that widespread unbelief and consequent divine heart hardening would be what he would experience in his ministry. In the context of the Isaiah passage explained that Israel's hardness would continue until the land lay in ruins. The exile was not the complete fulfillment of this prophecy. The hard-hearted condition was still present in Jesus' day, and we might add even today. Most Jews will remain generally unresponsive until their land is desolate in the tribulation. This is talking about prophecy here that hasn't happened yet, and they will return to the Lord when he returns to earth at his second coming. And the word lest or otherwise in the middle of verse 15, I don't know. It's not in the same interpretation. Probably indicates his judicial hardening of the Jews' hearts. So 2 Thessalonians 2:11, this one doesn't come up. That's right. I may have copied it. I did not copy it. So they, again, were not able to understand that bigger revelation since they failed to understand that basic one. So they rejected the Messiah, so now they're blind and deaf to anything greater than that. And they are cognitively unable to comprehend it now. And these parables are posing a challenge to the crowds that rejected him. And until they can accept Jesus as Messiah, they're not going to be able to receive any more truth than that. And so he's quoting Isaiah 9 through 10. God told Isaiah that he would experience widespread unbelief and consequent hardened hearts. And Jesus told Isaiah that this would continue until the land lay in ruins. So again, I'm just taking key points from what was said here and putting them here on Post-its. Hard-hearted, the root word here for hard-hearted in the Greek is callous, thick, dull, or insensitive. And the hard-hearted condition is still present in Jesus today, and it's still present today. Most Jews will remain unresponsive until their land is desolate in tribulation period, and they will turn to him when he comes again at the second advent. And there's a cross-reference here from Romans that I grabbed. There's also one from Zechariah. I will pour out on the kingship of David and the population of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication, so that they will look to me, the one they have pierced, and they will lament for him as one laments for and only son, and there will be a bitter cry for him, like the bitter cry for a firstborn. On that day, the lamentation in Jerusalem will be as great as the lamentation at Hadad Rimmon in the plain of Megiddo. The land will mourn, each clan by itself, the clan of royal household of David by itself, and their wives by themselves, and the clan of the family of Nathan by itself, and their wives by themselves, and the clan of the descendants of Levi, and he goes on and listen. And all the clans that remain, each separately with their wives. It's just saying that they will one day realize that, yes, he is Messiah, and they're going to mourn that they didn't get that. Romans 11:25 says, "For I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. A partial hardening has happened to Israel until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion. He will remove ungodliness from Jacob." So this brings up the question, what is divine heart hardening? Is God doing that? And why would he do that to somebody? And I have been digging into it, and don't fully have the answer right now. But there are references in the Bible to where God does harden someone's heart. But what I have seen is that every time that happens, we've done it ourselves first. We hardened, regardless of what happens or why he's doing that. We did it first. We hardened our own hearts first. And so he's not going to harden someone's heart who's not hard-hearted already. And we don't fully understand that, and we may not fully understand that ever. But possibly one of the things that I'm thinking based on what I've read into it so far, and probably won't be able to read as much and understand as much about it by the time we get to 2 weeks from now when we're doing this Matthew 13. Regardless, a potential reason is that they don't understand anyway. They've already rejected him. They've already hardened their hearts. They can't, again, until they can accept that basic truth that Jesus is Messiah, they won't be able to receive any more truth. It's just going to confuse them. It's just going to make them come up with these lies that aren't true about the kingdom, which could and would be potentially even worse. So we're not going to let them understand, because they can't get the basic truth that he is the Messiah. And part of that is, I think I read it somewhere. I was doing some internet research on it, and maybe the Bible Project has something on it. I can check there. If they have anything on hardened hearts. Let me see if I can search it real quick. So this is what I would do. Hard heart. Is there anything on hard hearts? There's this about Pharaoh, and that's one of the examples. Let's see. So a common question readers have about this story concerns the repeated theme of Pharaoh's hard heart. Sometimes we're told Pharaoh hardens his heart against God, but other times we read that God hardens his heart. So who's really behind all this evil? And what does this story tell us about God's relationship to evil at other times in history or in our own lives? To answer this question, you have to be patient and read the story slowly and in sequence. Otherwise, you'll short-circuit the experience the author wants you to go through. This is talking about Exodus. So in Moses' commissioning, God first says he knows Pharaoh will resist the demand to let the Israelites go. So God says that he will harden Pharaoh's heart. God knows the hearts of humans, and he can anticipate their responses. A sobering thought for all of us, echoed throughout the Bible. He knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows if we will ultimately accept or reject him. God will turn Pharaoh's evil back on his head, but does that mean God's responsible for Pharaoh's rebellion from beginning to end? You have to keep reading and stay alert. In Moses' and Pharaoh's first encounter, Pharaoh's heart became hard. So get your Bible nerd hat on, because there's a translation issue here that unfortunately complicates things. The Hebrew verb for became hard, chazak, is not passive, nor does it indicate who's initiating the action. It's called a stative verb, meaning it doesn't say whether it's Pharaoh or God. If you're reading in the NIV translation, it's ambiguous, which seems to be the point. However, some other modern translations have regrettably inserted their interpretation into the text and rendered this verb as was hardened. So in other words, they turned it into a passive verb. You walk away from chapter 7 thinking that God was hardening Pharaoh's heart from the first, which isn't what the text says. This is why it's important to study this. And so I'm going to grab this link and I'm going to add it to my whiteboard so that I can dig into this later. That's just what I'm doing. So orange, this gold orange color is for cross-reference. And so I'm going to add this cross-reference in here that I'm going to look at later to dig further into and add more post-it notes here to explain this whole concept of hardened hearts. But we'll read it now because I wanted the answer. So the Hebrew verb became hard is not passive. So let's see. Where did I leave off? As you read on, you'll notice a fascinating pattern emerge. In the first 5 plagues that God sends on Egypt, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart happens by his own will, or is again ambiguous, just as we saw in the opening scene. In the last 5 plagues, the pattern changes. So this is what I was saying here. Regardless, it starts with us hardening our own hearts. And so it talks through the 10 plagues and Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh's heart became hard, hardened his own heart. It was hard. He hardened his own heart. And all of these are, and then in here it suddenly says, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. Here it says he hardened his own heart. God announces he has hardened Pharaoh's heart. God hardened Pharaoh's heart. God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So here we're able to draw several conclusions. First of all, and this is why you plot this out visually, they've kind of done here. If you look at their method of studying at the Bible Project, you'll see that they do a lot of visual study as well, so that they can see these things. And we're able to draw several conclusions. First of all, in the plagues 6 through 10, that's these 6 here, we hear 4 times that God has hardened Pharaoh's heart. Can you see how this is a distinct change from plagues 1 through 5? In these stories, Pharaoh explicitly hardened his own heart, and the source of the hardening was ambiguous. Interestingly, in the 7th plague of hail, we see Pharaoh hardened his own heart. But afterward, the narrator uses the ambiguous verb became hard to describe it. This means that all of the other uses of the ambiguous verb do not imply that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, but just the opposite. So the point is, why does the author use this back and forth technique in describing Pharaoh's heart? It's all part of the brilliant diagnosis of the human condition in this story, which is about the mysterious nature of human evil. God called Pharaoh to humble himself and acknowledge that God is his authority and that he cannot redefine good and evil on Egyptian terms. Pharaoh's response is to balk at God, the God of Israel. After this, God gives Pharaoh 5 opportunities to repent and to humble himself, and 5 times he hardens his heart. So the author wants us to see that even the most heinous and absurd forms of evil, of human evil, are not a true threat to God's purposes. He can steer even this kind of evil toward his plan to bless all humanity through Abraham's family. So ultimately, whether it was God or Pharaoh, at the end of the plagues, Pharaoh wants the Israelites gone. And after losing his own son, he releases the Israelites. Not surprisingly, he has yet another change of heart and goes back on his decision to let the Israelites go. So Pharaoh musters his army, and we're told that God hardens his heart. We know how the story ends. The evil turn of Pharaoh's heart turns back on himself, resulting in an empire-wide catastrophe. So in Romans 9, they go through and they talk about, therefore he has mercy on whom he wills and he hardens whom he wills. Paul sees in Pharaoh's hard heart a pattern that was again at work in his own day, namely the rejection of Jesus as Messiah by the Jewish people. In this passage, Paul is not offering a commentary on the complicated theme of Pharaoh's heart, nor is he claiming that God alone was responsible. He's summarizing the main point of Exodus' story diagnosis of Pharaoh's evil. God's purpose to bless cannot be thwarted by heinous human evil. And applying it to an apparent tragedy in his own day, Jesus' execution was part of God's plan to bring blessing to all nations. So that's a good point. That's really interesting, because when we're seeing here that their hearts are hardened, these people that are rejecting him, their hearts are hardened, that was necessary for Christ's death, burial, and resurrection to even happen. That's very interesting. I'll have to make a note of that. So what I'm going to do real quick is make a note about God's purposes can't be thwarted by human evil. And sometimes the hard heart is there. The heart has to be hardened to bring about those purposes. But again, remember, and that's why I have this note, right? We harden our own hearts first, and he knows our hearts. He knows what we're going to do. God knows our hearts better than we do. I'm going to make that one purple because that's my own thought. I'm clearly distinguishing what's the difference. Hey, White Floofy Bear, thanks for hanging out. So what was my thought going? Sometimes the heart has to be hardened to bring about those purposes. He hardens our heart. He knows our hearts better than we do. Do you remember what I was going to say? So let's see. Jesus' execution was actually part of God's plan to bring blessing to all the nations. And it's Paul's exploration of God's justice and mercy. The fact that God can steer evil towards his purposes doesn't mean he engineered it. Pharaoh. Yeah, it was about the heart. I was going to make another note, but I can't remember what it was. So it's fine. I'll get it again if it's important. The fact that God can steer evil towards his purposes doesn't mean he engineered it. That's very important to know. Pharaoh is responsible for his own evil, just as Joseph's brothers were when they sold him into slavery. However, God used that for good as well. There is no force of human evil that can resist God's purpose to bring salvation and blessing to all nations. Yeah, our brains are it. Oh, I kind of remember now. So he knows our hearts better than we do, and his purposes can't be thwarted. But it's important to remember, again, that's why I put this note here, study everything in the light of the greatest command, which is love. And so God is not doing this stuff out of any kind of vindictiveness, because you rejected me, I'm gonna return the favor. It's all of this is love. All of this is based on love, and it's important that we remember this. So anytime we see something where it doesn't make sense and it seems in our understanding that it's him being vindictive or evil or mean, it's because we don't understand what's going on. And so we really need to dig in more to understand, because we have to trust that this is all based on love, and it's all based on a loving God. He's not out to get us. He's not out to be vindictive against us. So when we say sometimes hearts have to be hardened to bring about those purposes, I'll try to make a note of that here somehow so I can everything he does based on love. Don't forget. Not vindictive. So that's something we have to remember whenever we see something that doesn't make sense to us, whenever we see something that seems like it's coming from hateful, if it's God doing it, if it's Jesus doing it, that's not it. We just don't understand. So we have to dig in and understand, or just trust that, no, this is coming from a place of love. I just don't understand it yet. We want to understand, and that's what he wants us to do, is to keep that open mind to understand. So that's really good. I'm glad I found that. I love the Bible Project. I highly recommend BibleProject.com. Highly recommend using them as a resource for studying. I do it all the time. So what does this mean for us? So when human evil goes unchecked, bad things happen. Bad people can sometimes turn into monsters. And we're seeing that right now, kind of with what's going on with the Ukraine. Bad things happen. Evil can go unchecked. When that happens, people get hurt bad. And the author of Exodus is showing us that Pharaoh was responsible for the evil in his heart. At a clear point in the story, after Plague 5, he crossed a line, a point of no return. And at this point, God repurposes him. He repurposed him. So there's this reference in Romans about vessels being for good purposes, or for is that gonna okay, good. I was afraid it was gonna take me away from it. So where is this about the vessels? What was the reference? They didn't say specifically. Okay. Something about vessels for good and vessels for clean and unclean things. Was that here? Okay. You will say to me, why does he still find fault for who resists his will? On the contrary, who are you, a man who answers back to God? The thing molded will not say to the molder, why did you make me like this, will it? Or does not the potter have a right over the clay to make from the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for common use? What if God, although willing to demonstrate his wrath and to make his power known, endured with such patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? He did so to make known the riches of his glory upon vessels of mercy, which he prepared beforehand for glory. Even us, whom he also called, not from among Jews only, but also from Gentiles. And then he talks about a prophecy here. But that is talking about vessels of destruction, vessels of evil. And so Pharaoh crossed a point of return where he could have been a vessel for good, but he chose by his hardened heart, he's hardening his own heart and the evil in his own hardened heart, that his purpose became different. And the point of the story is not to tell us that God engineers evil. Rather, it's a cautionary warning to us, the reader, saying, don't be like Pharaoh. Strange things happen in the human heart and mind when we let the evil urges of our broken nature go unchecked. God will always graciously offer us chances to turn back. Would you have given Pharaoh so many chances? He gave him a ton of chances. But sometimes a person can cement themselves in a destructive path and reach a point of no return. God can, and sometimes will, allow our evil to destroy us. But the good news is, if that last sentence kind of freaks you out, you're not Pharaoh. The fact that you're asking the sobering question means that your heart is soft and wants to do the right thing. Glossing over what? What did I gloss over? As we progress through the rest of the biblical narrative, you'll see this theme of the hard versus the soft heart develop more. For now, let's ponder the mysteries, mysterious justice and mercy of God who wants to save us from ourselves. because I could dig so far, and so that's why it's easy to go down rabbit trails. Or like, are you talking about the vessel thing? Because I had a hard time understanding that scripture for a long time. Oh, yeah. Part in Europe, yeah. That's kind of happening now. It's a very sad thing. All we can do is pray for Putin. It doesn't say anywhere that someone's heart can't be softened again. I don't think it says that anywhere. If you know it does say that, let me know. But so there's things we can pray for. We can pray that God brings justice, and we can pray that somehow Putin's heart softened. The people around him, their hearts are softened, or they become brave and stand up to him and stop this from happening. There's all kinds of things that could happen we don't understand, but we can pray. Yeah, I got your gears moving in your head. What are you going to search for? And I'm glad I got you searching. So that's what it means by hardened hearts. And so I will make some more notes on that here. That's pretty awesome. We harden our own hearts first. And then, and we can end here on 16 through 17, where it talks about, but your eyes are blessed because they see, and your ears because they hear. For I tell you the truth, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but didn't see it, and to hear what you hear, but didn't hear it. And so his notes, Constable's notes here say the believing disciples were blessed for this reason. They saw not just what their unbelieving contemporaries couldn't see, but what many prophets and righteous people from bygone years to see but could not. Jesus referred to Old Testament prophets and believers who wanted more revelation about the kingdom than they had. Jesus' claim to be able to reveal more than the Old Testament prophets knew is a direct claim to being more than a prophet. Only God could do what he's claiming to do. God softening a heart. I feel like it's around somewhere. I don't know that there's anywhere where it says it's permanent. It'd be worth looking into. So on the notes, so even the Old Testament prophets wanted more understanding about the kingdom. And Jesus' direct claim to being more than just a prophet here, because only God's doing what he's doing now. Only God can do that, to reveal new truths about his kingdom. So this is another direct claim to being the Messiah. So he even in this time, but again, he's only talking to his disciples about this because these people have already made their decision. But you'll see with this whole book of Matthew that just because they've already made their decision, that doesn't mean God's not still trying. And I guess that's another way to think about it. Yeah, their hearts are hard right now, but that doesn't mean they have to stay that way. Because he's still, even though the Jews rejected him, he's still writing to them. He still had Matthew write to them to make the case again, he's the Messiah. So that tells me, yes, your heart can be softened again if it's hard. And there are probably examples of that somewhere. I think one of the kings of Persia or Babylon or something went back and forth. I think, I don't remember which one. It's the one that went crazy and went to the wilderness, and then he came back later after he got his sanity back. That one. I can't remember exactly who he is. But that, I guess that would be an example. But so even the fact that this is written to the Jews tells me, yeah, their hearts were hardened, but that doesn't mean they have to stay that way. And he's fighting and giving them every chance. Yeah, I can't remember either. It's definitely Old Testament. I think it was Babylon, maybe? Babylon, during their captivity, Babylon, maybe. So maybe it's in Daniel or around there somewhere. maybe. But that's where we will stop today, and hopefully that made sense to people. If you're watching this later on demand, or may add some comments to the YouTube chat, or thank you, White Floofy Bear, for hanging out and talking. I appreciate it. I appreciate you talking to me during it. And feel free to ask questions and stuff, because that's going to help make the study better too. So I'm going to continue working on 13. I may not, let's see. So next week I'll be continuing 13. I may be a little further because I do have to work on this when I'm not streaming, because there's quite a bit here to do that I need to finish before this service on whenever that is, in 2 weeks, when we're on chapter 13 VR Church. So I may be further along, so I may just be talking through it again. I'm not sure. I'll try to skip to a parable and show you how I actually do it live, so that you can see we kind of did a little bit here, but not a lot. But thanks for watching, and have a good evening or day wherever you're from. See you later.